Babylon, man, I've been so torn thinking about this world lately. Babylon, truth is so elusive and it drives me crazy. Babylon, this lost world is so hopeless. Babylon, Jesus Christ, that's where hope is. Babylon, no matter what they say, it's still so lost.
A reproof entereth more into a wise man than 100 stripes to a fool. An evil man seeketh only rebellion. Therefore a cruel messenger shall be sent against him. Let a bear robbed of her whelps meet a man rather than a fool in his folly. Whoso rewardeth evil for good shall not depart from this house. The beginning of strife is as one letteth out water. Therefore leave off connection before it be meddled with. He that justifieth the wicked and he that condemneth the just, even they both are an abomination to the Lord. Wherefore is there a price in the hand of the fool to get wisdom, seeing he hath no heart to it? A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born of adversity. A man void of understanding striketh hands and becometh surety in the presence of his friend. That is Proverbs 17:10 through 18. And this is Resisting Balaam, a Wrath and Grace podcast, where we seek to encourage the saints to stand firm with him on his word against all of the accusations made by the world, the flesh, and the devil, as we engage the culture of death that demands the sacrifice of our children. I am Callie, and if you notice, Pastor Darren is not with us. He is out in Nashville right now at the Southern Baptist Convention. He also has his OSA work going on next week, so he'll be back on the podcast soon. Keep him in prayer. He is very busy doing a lot of work for the cause of abolition. This is a Wrath and Grace podcast, so go check them out. They have their new app coming out on July 1st, where you can get their new teaching series on a whole variety of topics, music, merchandise, 3 separate podcasts, a bunch of books. So go check out Wrath and Grace app on both iOS and Samsung. Join our Patreon at Patreon.com/resisting Balaam to help us put out more content. We were able to secure both of our audio and video platforms, so thank you very much for that. Today we have a very good discussion that is going to take place. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and the opportunity has now presented itself, and I'm really grateful for our guest to come out and talk with us. His name is John, and he is one of the legislative directors for Texas Right to Life. John, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is John Sego. I serve as the legislative director for Texas Right to Life. We're the largest and oldest pro-life organization in Texas. Personally, I've worked with Texas Right to Life for over a dozen years, and I have a bachelor's in biblical studies and philosophy. I have a master's in bioethics, and I'm working on finishing up my doctorate in bioethics up in Chicago. So work on a lot of medical ethics issues, and then obviously work on issues related to elective abortion and protecting preborn children from various attacks that we see in society. So really happy to have this discussion with you.
Thank you again for coming on. Like I said, I really hope that this conversation encourages Christians on all sides of this debate to see that we can and we ought to have meaningful conversations with each other about our similarities and our differences, and hear from each other what the other person really has to say, where we can sit back and listen to them and engage in conversation rather than just an instant knee-jerk triggering and blocking the other person off. I find it really interesting that your studies in bioethics, and maybe off the line we can have a conversation sometime. I'm working on a documentary right now on IVF and embryo adoption, so I'd like to pick your brain on your ideas dealing with that sometime. And like I said, that's an aside. Our conversation today, we've decided to talk about the ethics behind abortion and how we ought to engage with the culture that hates God and demands that we sacrifice our children. And we want to talk about the ethics behind what it means to be created in the image of God, what that means to humans in general, and how we ought to treat each other, and that includes how we go about legislation in order to protect all humans and provide them all with a right to life, as your nonprofit has in its mission statement. So, how would you go about starting this discussion on the ethics behind how we are to look at abortion?
Yeah, so I would start with just the general conversation about what makes humans special. Why
Mhm.
are humans valuable? I had a media interview the other day with a very hostile reporter who asked if I was vegan, and as if that was relevant to me talking about the abortion legislation we were working on. And I said, all right, I'll buy it. I don't see what your connection is. And she said, well, if you're saying abortion is violent, and you're against that violence, but you're not against violence of, the food industry against animals. And so at that moment, I was like, okay, we need to stop and back up a little bit, because I believe there's an ethical difference, a
Right,
difference in the ethical status of animals than there is humans. I did think that was a controversial claim, but nowadays it is.
right,
So I would just start there. Is what's so special about humans? Why are we not, working with PETA or Sierra Club? Why don't I, try to work for one of those organizations?
right,
Um, and I think you can make some good secular arguments for, respecting dignity, respecting human beings. You can kind of get something that functions, I believe, kind of in a common morality. But I do believe in my organization, which is a Christian organization, we do believe that the Christian anthropology, what Scripture says about human beings, is the most thorough, it's the most intellectually honest, and it's the most true kind of to experience account of human beings, that they were that humans are created in the image of God, and that gives them immense value just by the nature of being a human, not by achieving some capacity, not by achieving some specific feature like intellectual awareness or self-reflection or morality or complex relationships. We've seen all of those things be suggested by philosophers who are against us, but we say the status of being human is what gives you your value.
right,
And so then you look at, well, when does that begin? We start at fertilization, whenever that the embryo starts acting like a self-directed organism rather than individual cells. You
right.
see, and so I would just kind of go down that route of, let's start
Yeah,
with what are humans so special. And usually I try to engage my neighbors. I live here in Austin, Texas, and so not all of my neighbors agree with my positions on these issues. try to ask them, what would you say to that question? Why are humans so special?
Right. I think it's really good what you just said there, that you and your organization hold to a Christian ethic, right? And in doing so, you do believe that God reveals himself in the light of nature. And appealing to that shows a consistency of the God that reveals himself in the light of nature. But
Yep.
you also possess something that non-believers don't have, and that's special revelation. And your appeal to special revelation is consistent with your appeal to the light of nature because it's the same God. So the basis of your argument is that the way that I would phrase it is you cannot unjustly kill a human because they're created in the image of God, right? So that would be our only legitimate argument against abortion, but not just abortion, but any unjust killing of a human, because that individual human has value, dignity, and worth qua human, right? Because they are human, right?
Hmm.
And so that being our baseline ethic, how do we move from that, which is our ethic, that you cannot unjustly kill a human because they're created in the image of God? How do we move from that to um, show why we shouldn't kill humans, whether it's through um, acts of violence after they're born or before they're born? Because there should be a consistency in how we apply this. And
Yeah.
I was telling you before, I really appreciate the work that Texas Right to Life does with things like the 10-day rule in Texas, right? About saying, hey, this is unjust killing of a human being because they are created in God's image. How do we move from our ethical argument of that to
Yeah.
how we apply it in any given circumstance? And we'll go broadly and move from that to abortion eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. So, where we are in society right now is the respecting that, your dignity or my dignity, it protects us against attacks on our right to life. So
Right.
if we were attacked, violently, no one's gonna just say, "Oh, that doesn't matter. That's an amoral activity." No, they would say, "Yeah, that's wrong," and they might want to get into details and what happened, but they would at least acknowledge the murder of someone like you or me is unethical. So we have to do some work to get who's in this category that we're talking about.
Hmm.
So going to embryology, like you
Hmm.
said, going to the book of nature, going to science, what science tells us about the beginning of life, making sure that we're combating these add-ons. There is this
Hmm.
kind of moral dualism is in our
Hmm.
society where you could be human, but you have to have something else to have value. You have to have this
Hmm.
additional status called personhood that you get, and at certain stages or in certain events you get, you may be human, sure, nobody's arguing that, my friend who's pregnant is carrying something other than human, but they are arguing what she is carrying is not, not morally important
Right.
until certain events. So you got to talk about that. So who's on the board, and then also making sure, like you said, we're protecting all people after, because if we say you have to be self-aware, you have to have a conscience, you have to have complex relationships, if those are kind of the criteria to be a person, well, we have a lot of people in our society who are going to be kicked out of that
Hmm.
person status as well, because when they have an intellectual disability, or they are unconscious and in a persistent vegetative state, or
Right.
if they have something happens to them towards the end of life, like they start losing their memory,
Hmm.
their identity, sense of identity and memories, well, then all of a sudden they're kind of they had to get put in the category, and now they're kind of slowly getting out of that category of
Right.
protection. and these are the individuals on the margin. These are the human
Right.
beings, we call them vulnerable. We kind of, these are vulnerable, innocent human life that society is very quick to say, you no longer have this moral status. Yeah, sure, you're
Mhm.
human. We're not arguing you're anything else, but there's this kind
You're
of dualism.
subhuman.
You need you need something else for us to say, okay, our laws are going to protect you. My moral, I have a moral obligation to protect you.
Right.
So I kind of go there because that's where individuals who have brain injuries, for example, extremely vulnerable, and they're the ones that are being, they're another category of humans who are being completely, you know, uh, ignored, and their right to life is being taken away.
Right. How does this correlate to some of the eugenics projects or genocides of our history as humans, be it, the Tutsis and Hutus in Rwanda, whatever's going on in the Congo, what happened in the Ukraine, the Jews in all of Eastern Europe, slavery in America, not just in America, but currently going on in so many parts of the world right now. Um, China, you can name any country right now and talk in terms of oppression. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing is an artificial arbitrary category has to be made in order to declassify somebody as being human,
Exactly.
making them subhuman so that you can justify the oppression or the violence that you are putting on that individual human. So
Yeah,
how would
no,
you explain that
absolutely.
correlation?
Yeah, it's just this added on, is being human, is being, Homo sapien, a member of Homo sapien species. Is that enough, or do you have to have something else? I think the Chinese government is being accused of, wiping out entire populations and actually using them for organ donors. And it's something that several state governments have condemned. Congress has talked about it. It's been discussed at the UN. And so what they have is human beings walking around. Yes, they're human biologically speaking, but there's this added kind of moral dualism. There's this other thing. Being human's not enough, and this minority in China is just completely being ignored, and actually, in a utilitarian sense, being used as parts. Organ
Hmm.
donation, forced organ donation, to use them to benefit others.
Right.
And so, yeah, exactly what you're saying is that a devaluing, and not even just devaluing, a violent subjugation, of violent coercion,
Hmm.
and forced death. And so but it starts with this saying, being a member of our human community is not enough. You need one more
Right.
thing, whether it's a political recognition, or like all the historical examples you mentioned. They all kind of put their own little spin on it, but there was this added ingredient needed for me to say my laws are going to protect you. And that's
Right.
completely unethical in our perspective. And I think you can make a secular argument for it, but I think, as you mentioned, the most consistent and the most intellectually honest is saying every human being has been created by the image of God. Every human being has this value. We are similar to God. He's given us some of his characteristics. We have relationships to the God has given us the ability to have relationships to one another and to him. And functionally, we're very similar to God in that he put us on earth to serve in a godlike role, to have
Mhm.
dominion over the earth. So these three ways, we are very similar to God. He created us different than anything else in creation. And scripture is pretty clear about that. And that's why the first civil law that we see in Genesis 9 is about murder. It's about
Mhm.
shedding blood of someone, and
Right.
that there should be a proportional consequence for shedding the blood of an individual human being. And we see that is carried on into the New Testament with Romans 13, where Paul talks about the government having a sword, and he doesn't have the sword in vain,
Right.
meaning, and that word there, kind of alludes to capital punishment, alludes to
Right.
he's been given this serious power to
Mhm.
distribute justice whenever wrong is done. And so I think the Christian account, the Judeo-Christian scriptures make the best case for this. But
Right.
yeah, that's kind of what I would see at the
But
core is.
even non-believers understand it, right? I agree with everything that you've said, and there are really good articles out there that show the exegetical connection between Romans 13 and Genesis 9.
Right.
Amazing stuff. But even God-hating pagans understand this. Look at everything that happened last year. The people went to the streets demanding justice. No justice, no peace. They saw in their corrupted images, they saw injustice.
Yeah.
Now they're looking at a lot of it incorrectly, and they don't have the solution that Christians have, but they're groping around in the dark longing for justice because they recognize God, and they recognize the value of humans because they're created in the image of God. And I want to explore some of these things, and some of the stuff that you've said, connecting Genesis 9 and Romans 13 when we come back from our break, as we go to the streets and hear about people that are going sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world that hates them because they love people. We love sinners, and because of our compassion, we go out and share truth. So we'll be right back after we hit the streets.
Just start talking. You introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Jared. I'm a pastor here with Brandon Scalf at Cruciform Bible Church. And we were out, I think it was only my second time out of the abortion mill. And I don't have a crazy story where, I got raw chicken thrown on my face or anything like that. But one thing I noticed is, one, most of these women are taken there by men. And these fathers are taking their children literally to be murdered. And my wife had newly been pregnant, and so we were standing out there about 20 weeks in. Our child had basically just got past the point where he could be killed. And so this is a very fresh, emotional thing for us. And so we sat there, my wife and I, we watched a couple pull in. And so we're sitting there weeping for them and praying. And as they pull out, the father stops the car to talk to us and just starts yelling and screaming and cussing at us. Like, we're the ones that did something wrong. We're advocating for the salvation of his baby, who he just brought to be murdered. And it is an incredibly, these women need help. These babies need help. Bad. It was a very emotional time. Like I said, I don't have a crazy story, but I know for a fact that these babies need our help, and then abortion mill ministry is important. I think the next day at that same abortion mill, Brian Schrenk saw a baby saved. So we know that abortion mill ministry makes a difference, but they need the gospel and need help.
We are Titus 2 women, seeking to glorify God through the teaching of younger women, biblically, to love their husbands, children, and be keepers of the home.
Not grudgingly or as a legalistic chore, but rather to joyfully sacrifice in loving their husband and children as unto the Lord.
Giving glory to God and finding joy in caring for our families in only the way wives and mothers can.
As God has blessed us with female traits that make our work in the home essential to a godly home.
that story. And if you are out actively involved with evangelism, please send us a 3 to 5 minute video where we can show it on our podcast of a story about how God has made himself known through some evangelism event, or how you've experienced some sort of spiritual warfare. You know, you've seen a baby saved at one of these murder mills, or just an engagement you've had at the college campus, or just with your neighbor. So take part in evangelism. Go share the gospel of Jesus Christ in words and in deed. So we're back with John from Texas Right to Life, and we've been talking about the ethics behind uh, abortion in particular, but just being human in general. And we're now going to start moving it closer and closer to the abortion context, which is just honestly, it's a small portion of the overall how do we treat humans conversation. But what makes this part of the conversation slightly different, and really one that takes up more time than others, is that generally speaking in the United States, it's illegal to unjustly kill somebody. There is a legal process out there that protects humans from violent action against them that causes their unjust death. Um, there are some other cases that go beyond that, which is one of the things Texas Right to Life is doing with the medical 10-day rule about killing humans that are not productive members of society, vegetative state, etc. But there is a much larger section of the population that likewise is unprotected by American law, where the government sanctions, gives official government permission and approval to unjustly kill a human. And that happens in the womb. We're talking about abortion. So let's go ahead and move our conversation and take our Christian ethic and apply it to the unjust killing of humans in the womb, and focus on that, because this is the one instance in our legal framework where the government gives permission to unjustly kill a human, right? Is that a fair assessment of what we're dealing with?
Yeah, I think there are some, like you said, there's some other examples in medical ethics, but this is definitely, by the numbers in Texas at least, we're talking about more than 52,000 a year.
Right.
52,000 reported ones. There's others
Reported, correct.
that are done at a clinic that are kind of sanctioned, like you said, by law, and people are licensed for this to be, a legitimate practice of medicine, to take the life of an innocent human being through elective
You
abortion.
just said something really important there that I don't believe a lot of Christians understand on the whole pro-life spectrum. That, and it's an implication of what you said. You said that because I mentioned sanctioning, and you agreed with that, but it's about the licensed medical practitioner that is given the legal sanctioning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Texas says that a woman can unjustly kill her own preborn child for any reason that she wants to, by any method that she wants to, up until the time of birth, and it is not to be considered criminal homicide, right? So none of these pro-life healthcare laws tell a woman when and where she can or cannot kill her child. She's given government permission for any reason up until the time of birth. All of these pro-life healthcare laws are directed at restricting her access to her right to do this by defining what is a lawful medical procedure that has the intended result of the death of a child, so that the doctor is not charged with criminal homicide?
Well, no, I mean there are definitely those laws that count, but we also have laws that just that outlaw abortions at specific times. So we had a third
Example,
trimester.
okay.
So there was a third trimester ban, and then you changed that in 2013 to a 20-week ban, where now it is illegal to have an abortion after 20 weeks. That's not regulating in the sense of saying when and where. That's a prohibition. So I agree. There are some laws that are simply regulations. That
Can,
one would be
can
a
I ask
prohibition.
a can I
Yeah.
ask a question about what you're talking? This 20-week prohibition. Um, where is that in the Texas state penal codes?
So it's in the health and safety code.
Okay, and it's used to define what is considered a lawful medical procedure that has the intended result of the death of the child, which prevents Chapter 19 from applying to the licensed medical practitioner in 19.6b.
So yeah, I mean, yeah. So what you're just getting at
Yes,
is that there's an exception for abortionists in the penal code, that
right,
abortion is not handled like other homicides. That's
right.
or assaults. That's your
Right, right.
yeah.
And how do we know from 19.6 what is considered a lawful medical procedure that has the intended result of the death of the child? Where do we get what constitutes that lawful medical procedure?
Yeah, so that's the connection to 170 and
Right,
171 of the health and
right.
safety code.
Right. So that prohibition deals with what the doctor can be charged with or not charged with, right?
Mhm.
So if the doctor performs the abortion according to 171, this 20-week ban, then he is not going to be charged with criminal homicide because he's performing the lawful medical procedure. But that lawful medical procedure does not apply to the woman. Would a woman be charged? Is it considered criminal homicide if a woman kills her own preborn child at, say, 32 weeks? Or is that law specifically written to restrict her access to her right to an abortion, according to like Bolton and Roe?
Yeah, I don't think that the law. I understand you're saying that's the meaning of the law, but that's not how the law functions. Is that it is saying we're restricting your right. All the law says is that abortion after 20 weeks is illegal, and it's no longer gets
For
that
who?
protection which you're talking about. Well,
Right,
it's no one does an abortion other than an abortionist in the way that this is defined. So yes, your point is that the law is written to stop the abortionist from
correct.
performing it because he's the one
Right,
causing the death. He's the one who is, and we do this a lot, is we outlaw the providing of an activity, the procedure itself rather
right,
than the customer. So, so I mean, I think that there's a lot of public policy example where that's the approach is that you go to, we're not going to say every ordinary Texan needs to
right,
know what's an illegal procedure or not. But every individual who's practicing medicine has to know. So if I
right.
go into my doctor and I say, hey, if I tell my doctor, hey, I'm depressed, I just got laid off my job, I would like you to give me an overdose of drugs as a
Right.
mercy killing, and I'm not. I'm not creating or committing a crime by asking that. But if he says yes, that doctor is committing a crime because we have prohibited mercy killings. So he has the obligation to know what the legal requirement is because I have to go through him. He's the gatekeeper of this illegal procedure. So
So, but
I'm not
here's the
doing anything
difference
wrong.
in what you're saying, and let me ask it this way: if a doctor performs an abortion at 22 weeks.
Mhm.
Is that criminal homicide for him to do that?
You could try to bring those charges, but criminal.
But I know,
I mean,
according to the law.
so according to the law, he could lose his license. You could still bring criminal penalties against him, but that
Right.
depends on the district
DA
attorney.
and-
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Now, in the same instance, can it be considered criminal homicide for the woman who goes in there and pays to have her child killed?
Again, you could try to bring that. I don't think it would be
Actually,
successful.
you can't. It's illegal. I mean, the 19.6 explicitly says that it's not criminal homicide for a woman.
Well, yeah, but that actually is a contested legal point because there's other laws on the books that prohibit aiding and abetting an abortion. So, I mean, you're kind of in. You can, yeah, it may be accomplished. You may be able to bring that suit, but you would be arguing two different parts of Texas law, contradict each other. And I think
And
that's
they
what you're
do,
taking.
right? And they do contradict, right? But
Yeah.
they're. My point is, these laws are written intentionally which is one of the things that you said. The focus is on restricting access to a woman's right to kill her child.
No. That I never say that because I don't talk about rights. The state of Texas doesn't acknowledge the right to abortion. So we never write the laws like that. If you actually look at the law, it says this is an illegal act, that an abortionist, the individual who's going to be doing this procedure, that he can't do this after 20 weeks. That's how the law works. Now, you may look at it and say the meaning of this law, kind of the bigger picture takeaway, is about rights, but that's not how the laws are written.
But literally, the law is written in the homicide codes to make abortion laws healthcare, to define what is considered healthcare, so that the doctor is not prosecuted. And by prosecuted, I mean the proceedings, not guilt found or penology. I'm talking about the entire thing, from the DA looking at the evidence. Is there a charge? If so, what's the charge?
Can a charge be
the
brought?
trial?
Yeah.
Right. So, according to the homicide codes and the healthcare codes, abortion is treated like healthcare, so that we can determine if there is a charge to be made for criminal homicide against a doctor and never against the woman. That is how the laws are constructed.
Yeah.
Right. And this has taken place since the early 2000s, when federally we've allowed, the government has allowed us to consider the unborn at any stage that the state desires as victims of violent acts. Right. That's when the homicide code changed. That's when the definition for individual was taken back to fertilization, which is something that we agree with. This is how we ended up with fetal homicide laws, right? So like, if a man does something that causes the death of a child in the womb, he can be charged with criminal homicide, based off of our fetal homicide laws. Same thing for a woman that does that. The only two people, well, there's three really, but the people that are given separate privilege from that is a woman that kills her own child for any reason, by any method, up until the time they're born, or the doctor, as long as he commits his homicidal acts as a lawful medical procedure that has the intended result of the death of the child, which is found in the healthcare laws, or IVF research and the dispensing of like Plan B and things like that from pharmacies. So those are the only exceptions. How do we look at that consistently with our moral argument that you can't unjustly kill a human because they're created in the image of God?
Yeah.
How do we get to one without leaving our only moral argument against it.
Yeah. So, yeah, what you're acknowledging is that Texas law, even that very chapter, contradicts itself. Is that it
Correct.
says, it says that we're going to claim that the law should protect individuals from fertilization and yet allow life to be taken in certain circumstances. And the reason that Texas law says that is because of Roe v. Wade and subsequent cases. That
Right.
Texas is adopting contradictory laws to go as far as it practically can to actually stop some of those murders. You can't stop all of them because of what the Supreme Court ruling is and the limitations on the state. And so Texas has decided we're going to adopt even seemingly contradictory, policies in principle to save thousands, tens of thousands of preborn children. And since Texas has done that since 1990, you have more than 600,000 preborn children have been saved from elective abortion because of these types of policies. When you look at our abortion rate in 1990 and where it was going, pro-life laws have actually reduced that number of abortion, and we had population increase. So when you do the math, you're talking about more than 500,000 lives are saved today because Texas is adopting contradictory legislation like that. We're saying we want to protect all life from fertilization. We can't do that. So instead of just saying, oh, well, we can't do anything, we actually are passing policies that do save lives, like after 20 weeks or like after 6 weeks, according to the bill that we just passed this session.
Can I say something about the 6-week one? I think that before I get to what I was going to say about what you just said, I want to deal with the 6-week situation, because I think that's a little bit misleading. I think we need to be honest about what the bill does and does not do. The bill does not specify what form of detection procedure must be used. Can a doctor looking for a child find a baby at 6 weeks using a transvaginal ultrasound? In some cases, yes. Does that mean that they are required by law to do that? No. They can use any acceptable medical procedure that detects the heartbeat, which most abortionists currently use because they're regulated to do so, a transabdominal. So you have a doctor who is not in his best interest to find it, using a lower quality detection device. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's actually looking for it. At what point do they really find it? Between 12 and 13 weeks. So we know that's what they're going to use. So let's at least be honest with what is really going to happen, right? I think it does our cause a disservice to say 6 weeks when the truth is it's actually more like 12 weeks. Do you see? Yes. Could it happen at 6 weeks if we required transvaginal? Sure. Do we do that? We don't. We require transabdominal. So
we don't require transabdominal. We don't clarify the method. We say according
we don't clarify the method. So what method is
it sets the legal standard at medical standard practice according to the position, the health condition of the woman, and the age of the child. So by law, they're already required to play the heartbeat out loud for the woman.
Yes, I agree.
By law, they're required to determine the gestational age of the child. So these things are already in law. They have to record those. They have to put those in records. And it's actually it's doing the same crime if they don't do the paperwork that they're supposed to.
I get that.
Okay,
what do they use? What do they use?
So medical standard practice is something that we will be challenging them in court if, like you're saying, they're not making good faith effort. These legal standards are actually very important.
Is it good faith effort for them to use a transabdominal?
No, not according. If somebody comes in at 6 weeks, you don't use a transabdominal. So there's Doppler. There's multiple different technologies that can be
Right.
used. And
Right.
that will be compared to what regular OB-GYNs do. Whenever you go into an OB-GYN and they're actually, it's a wanted pregnancy. Well, they're motivated to hear the heartbeat, because if you hear a heartbeat, there's in between 93 and 98% chance that that child's going to survive to birth if you can find a heartbeat at the point when you
Right.
can find the heartbeat. So they're motivated to find that heartbeat. That's the standard that the abortionists are going to be compared to. So
But
to
they're not
say,
held to that standard, though.
yeah, they
The
are.
bill doesn't require that. The bill just
It absolutely
says,
does. Medical
huh,
standard practice based on the condition of the woman and the age of the child. That's in the law. And that's what we will be in court holding them accountable to. And they have to record what method they did, the results of that finding. So those things go into record, and those things can be used in a lawsuit, a civil suit against the abortionist, which we will be bringing against any abortionist that we have, cause to believe they broke the law.
right.
So it's not nothing. It's actually, I mean, you have all the evidence in front of you to determine if they made that good faith effort or not.
Yeah. And, and we can talk about how the law, uh, what it actually requires as far as like time or what type of uh, machine is used. And I shouldn't have gone down that road because honestly, it's irrelevant to the overall conversation, um, which is, should we use unjust laws that sanction the unjust killing of humans in the hopes that some humans are possibly not killed as a result? Are we utilitarian pragmatists saying that the ends justify the means? And if so, is that a Christian ethic, or does that violate our own principle that says you cannot unjustly kill a human because they're created in the image of God, right?
Yeah, and that's one thing that the laws that we work on
Uh-huh.
the laws that we work, like the 20-week prohibition and even SB8, that's the 6-week ban. These laws do not say abortion before 20 weeks is ethical. The SB8 does not say abortion before 6 weeks or on a child who you can't detect a heartbeat is ethical. These laws do not say that. And these laws say this is what the law is going to be, is that abortions are prohibited afterwards.
But are they used to define what is a lawful medical procedure that has the intended result of the death of the child?
No, it's
Is
a
the 20
negative.
is
It
is the
prohibits.
20 is the 20-week ban used to define what constitutes a lawful medical procedure so that the doctor cannot be charged with criminal homicide?
No, it's a negative. It says you can't do this. Before this law, you were able to, and now this is prohibited. So we can talk about if that's the ethical approach, but it's not as if these laws say we love Roe v. Wade and we just want to,
Oh,
to
I don't
codify the
believe
law.
that you love Roe v. Wade. I
Well, no, I'm
don't
saying, but
hear
the
don't get me
laws
wrong.
themselves, that's what the
The,
laws themselves don't function like that.
but the
So
laws do function in a way to either comply or not comply with Roe, Bolton, which has created the framework in our homicide codes and healthcare codes as to how we write these laws that do sanction the unjust killing of humans by regulating which ones are illegal,
one
by
thing,
defining which ones are a lawful medical practice
so
procedure.
I mean, and this is where I think I would appreciate uh, those of my friends who are nullificationists to
Right.
acknowledge, Texas Right to Life. The 20-week ban was not constitutional according to Roe
Yeah.
v. Wade. Okay,
Well,
so
Roe v. Wade isn't constitutional, so I mean
well,
you got that.
no, but according to abortion jurisprudence, 20 weeks was not constitutional. It violated Roe v. Wade, Doe versus Bolton, and subsequent cases. There were pro-life organizations in the Capitol saying that. There were pro-life organizations in the Capitol saying, don't pass the 20-week prohibition because it's unconstitutional and the courts will strike it down. Our organization, that's exactly what we want. We want cases to be in court to show how Roe v. Wade is wrong. And this is a strategy disagreement, is that we agree Roe is unconstitutional, but we think that the game has to be played in the courts. And we think there are good ways to do that, and we've been proving it. So we're not one of the organizations that say don't pass pro-life bills that may violate Roe. We have to play within the lines of Roe v. Wade. We don't agree with that at all. We're very clear that if we only support a bill if it will lead to legal victories, if it promises to lead to undermining Roe v. Wade. So we're more aggressive than other organizations are. I mean, for example, with this SB8, we were supporting this when other organizations weren't, because we do have to challenge Roe v. Wade. It's not as if we're taking our lead from Roe v. Wade. We study Roe, we see where the weak points are, and we've been going after those weak points. So it's not as if we're complying with Roe like you're trying to make it sound. It's like we're just looking to Roe to see how far we can go. No, not at all. We're trying to overturn Roe, but we do it in the judicial system, and there's really good precedent for this being done. So,
Right.
Whenever we pass a law that says 20 weeks, no abortions after 20 weeks, that's a strategic to show how Roe is wrong, that the viability dichotomy that the Supreme Court adopted is bad science and bad law. We want to argue that. We don't want to just wait and hold out until we can pass a bill that bans every single abortion. We don't think that's ever going to happen. That is not a winning strategy to actually stop the murder. We believe we need to be in court being, more prudent in passing laws that can attack Roe. So that's what we're trying to work on. So it's not as if we're, backhandedly affirming Roe. We're very clear. Our strategy is to attack Roe.
Right. Okay. So I get it. You want to attack Roe. You believe that Roe versus Wade is unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But these laws are healthcare. These laws are written in a manner to define what constitutes a lawful medical procedure. That is what the language of the law is doing. The law itself is defining what is a legal procedure for the doctor in 19.6 to have that privilege. That's why they're written in the healthcare codes. That's why they are addressed about what is prohibited and not. They are regulating, and the senators and stuff will use this language. They are regulating what constitutes unjust killing from a lawful medical procedure. Now, you ethically are saying no, it's unjust. I get that, and I agree that you believe that. These laws are not saying that. These laws are defining what is the difference between criminal homicide and a lawful medical procedure. That's what these.
And I don't understand why you're putting so much emphasis on that, because if the strategy, we are playing the chessboard in front of us. So
Right.
if I believe the Lord has called us to save innocent human life from murder, and then I'm going to try to adopt the most prudent strategy to do so. The law
Okay.
is not just a teacher. The law is a weapon. It is a sword. It is
Correct.
used to actually save individuals. And that's what the 20-week prohibition is it actually has saved lives. So
Okay.
you're hanging up on what the implication of this being a legal practice or not is. If you could pass a law that saves and is actually used as a tool to save lives and gets us closer to overturning Roe, where we can save all innocent human lives from elective abortion, I don't see how you can make a legal argument. I mean, how you can make a moral argument against that if we're not lying about it.
Okay,
If we're not,
that's fair. That is fair. Let me use what you just said to try to explain this moral argument against it.
Yeah.
You just referenced Romans 13 and the sword that the law is. It's more than just a tutor. It is actually God commanding his deacon to pour out his wrath on the evildoer.
Yep.
Right? That's why he has the sword. That's which is what you were just saying.
Yep.
That passage warns him to not wield it in vain. And you had applied that earlier to, or made a connection to Genesis 9:6,
Yeah.
dealing with specifically this law of retributive justice that is commanded by God to his deacons to apply retributive justice when there is an unjust killing of a human.
Yeah.
We hear over and over again throughout Scripture about woes showing partiality to the wicked. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? One of the ones I read earlier was that it's an abomination to both justify the wicked and condemn the just. Does a law that is unwilling to equally apply justice to all forms of criminal homicide, is that showing partiality to the wicked? Is that justifying the wicked? Is that actual retributive justice that's commanded by the state? Or are they unjust laws of the state wielding that sword in vain?
No, I don't think so. I think what it is it's using the law to hold the wicked accountable as much as you can. Now, and so the question is, do we want any laws that save anyone, or do we want no laws that save anyone? So should I have waited and not passed Senate Bill 8 and said, well, we can only pass a bill that bans every abortion, not pass it and wait another 2 years without saving lives after 6 weeks? I mean, that's, there is no just law in a post Genesis 3 world. Every law is tainted. Every law is broken. And if it's a perfect law, well, the law enforcement is broken. So we are dealing, and we have to be realistic about this in a biblical worldview, is that we are sinners who are regulating sin in a society where all the way to the bottom, from the legislators, the judges, the law enforcement, and people practicing these procedures, everyone is sinned. Everyone is a sinner. Everyone is flawed. And so in that context, I don't have the liberty to seek justice and hold out for a perfect law, for a perfect set of circumstances where full justice is going to be acknowledged. And so I don't think, I think we're kind of grandizing what we're doing here by trying to seek justice in a fallen world. No, it's not. There's no perfect way. Given the circumstances we're in, we want to adopt the tools that will save as most as possible, and do it in a way that is truthful about what it is. And you could listen to the bill signing when the governor signed Senate Bill 8. He didn't say abortion before 6 weeks is fine. He said all abortion is abominable. So I think.
But there's a lack of consistency but here's what I'm trying to say, right? When we look at these, there's a conflation of the justness of a law and saving children. I think that laws, there is protection that's bound up in laws. 100% agree with that. But the law is used to punish the evildoer.
Yeah.
That's what it's designed to do. And we can look at laws as either being objectively just or unjust. What I'm trying to say is, in our legal system, there is, when it comes to criminal homicide, there is a form of criminal homicide that is not approached the same way as we do all other forms of criminal homicide.
No, not all others, but I see what you're saying. Yeah.
there is not each individual instantiation of that crime judged based off of the merits of that crime. So, judicially, the law is not applied equally. The laws of criminal homicide are not applied equally to abortion that they do on every other form of criminal homicide. And what I'm saying, there are forms of violent killings that are justified. Capital punishment being one of them. Self-defense. Our laws rightly delineate between just killings and unjust killings. This is a situation where the government sanctions unjust killing through the laws that it writes.
Yeah, but and that's the thing, is that nobody's arguing that that's just. Nobody's arguing for the exception in the penal code. The pro-life movement's not defending that. The pro-life movement is actively working to get to a point where we can stop that, where we can actually challenge that. But we're not there yet.
Okay.
We would not win that fight. I think it's been proven the last few sessions that bill has been introduced and has not been passed. Even if it was passed in other states, it was stopped by their state court. So
right.
It's not as if there's an option to do that.
So what are the two main talking points that legislators give to why they will not support a bill of equal justice?
I don't know what bill you're talking about. The bill that was filed in Texas is not it's the bill that tries to ban all elective abortions doesn't match what you're talking about. So I don't know what specifically you're talking about. But
a bill that would remove all pro-life legislation and remove all exceptions to the homicide code. What would be the reason why, like Texas Right to Life, would not support that bill?
So it wouldn't actually get to the point where it would save any lives, because it would be it would be struck down by courts. So we have to, that's what I was saying earlier, we have to pass legislation that proves to the courts they should review Roe v. Wade and actually walk back that decision. And, there's evidence in the last 12 years that that's actually working. A law that just says no abortions tomorrow is not a prudent attack to actually undo the unjust policy that you're talking about.
So you don't see a healthcare law that sanctions the unjust killing of a human as being unjust?
I do see it as unjust. Absolutely. I see Roe v. Wade as unjust. I see the response to Roe v. Wade as unjust.
Okay, good. So, but you are okay with using unjust laws to the end of possibly saving a human?
No, I'm not. I'm not confirming those laws. I'm working to undo those laws, and I'm adopting a legal strategy that has the goal of undoing that exception that you have a problem with. But the problem is, I don't think there's any silver bullets. I think this is more
I don't think it's
a
silver bullet. Yeah, I don't think it's a silver bullet either. I'm asking for only just laws that do not show partiality, like the 20-week ban, like the heartbeat bill.
But that's impossible. That's in our fallen world where we are, given the Supreme Court, given the powers that be, and what our governor and our attorney general is willing to do. That's not an option. We are in a situation.
Right, and that's my point. So you recognize that they're unjust, but because of a reality that you see, you think it's impossible to only have a just law, so that justifies the use of an unjust law to the end of possibly saving a human.
I think that the 20-week prohibition is more just than the law was before 2013.
Right. So that's moral relativism, right?
No, absolutely not. No, it's objective. It's absolutely objective.
okay, is a 20-week ban, or let's say it this way, is a 4-week ban objectively just or unjust?
The, you're it depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking about in
Right.
a fallen legal system that has already said? I mean, that's the thing is like
That's what I mean. That's the moral relativism. It depends on it's relative to the context in which
no,
that
no,
law is
that's not what
placed.
relativism means, though.
Sure it is.
Relativism means there are no objectives. There are no objective realities. I'm saying there are objective truths. Prudence, prudence is applying those objective truths given the circumstance that you have. So wisdom and prudence, I mean, knowledge and prudence rather, are two different things. You're acting
Right.
as if
So
there's not already, this is where prudence is needed. Is we have a situation in front of us, we have to respond to.
right. And the response that we're doing is using utilitarian pragmatism and moral relativism to justify the use of an unjust law.
No, 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 no. Because we're never along the way saying that Roe v. Wade is right. We're not
Right.
relativism would
You admit that it's unjust.
yes,
Yeah,
and that's
no,
why we're
I agree.
actively working to undo it. So it's
Right.
not relativism, and it is pragmatic in the sense that it's prudent. It's just like playing chess would be, making decisions based on the context. And I think,
Right.
but that's what you see in scripture. That's what you see in Esther. That's what you see, I mean, constantly whenever you have God-fearing individuals working with governments, you see
Mm-hmm.
them using the laws in the books, using the
Mm-hmm.
legal system in front of them, using the
Mm-hmm.
opportunities that in God's providence he has brought to their attention. They're not
Mm-hmm.
standing up and just giving speeches. They're saying, save all the people. They're using the system back and forth. They're negotiating to save as many as they can and being faithful to that call.
See, I think that highlights one of the differences is my goal is to be just, not necessarily to save. The saving of humans is a byproduct of my goal, which is to apply just laws in all circumstances
and
and
I think
all
I
situations.
understand that, but I think in a
And
post Genesis 3 world, we don't have that luxury.
and
We to be realistic about the human condition and about the fallen state of man, we don't have the luxury you're saying to say I'm only going to advocate for perfectly just laws. That we don't have that luxury in a post-fall world. I think it's too naive of how we actually are called to do justice. The scripture
right.
tells us do
Hmm.
justice, not
Right.
stand and stand and talk about justice. Do it. Well, that
Right.
means going in that context, it means going to the orphan and going to the widow, redeeming
Hmm.
them, bringing them in so that, I mean,
Hmm.
so it's not saying there should be no widows, there should be no orphans, and until then,
Right.
I'm just going to stand strong on this statement. No, it's actually going and doing it. And that's why,
Right.
that I think that's what the other side is missing is I can support a bill that is not going to pass and only say this is the only one bill I want you to do, or I can pass bills that get us closer to undoing these unjust laws that you're talking about.
Right. I'm going to support an unjust law that undoes a different unjust law. That's what I'm hearing.
I don't think the first law is unjust if we're doing it to restore justice. I mean, to ban abortions at 20 weeks is just, given the circumstance that we're in, that abortions at 20 weeks and further were going to occur. To pass a law that saves some. I mean, I think you can look at like the abolition movement in England, that this is how they did it. I don't think anybody's condemning what happened in England with outlawing slavery one step at a time. I mean, this is how a flawed legal system that is, human government works. I don't think,
Yeah, I'll send you some links to quotes of Wilberforce decrying that type of incrementalism. But I don't want to get too far off. I'm just saying that a law that sanctions the unjust killing of a human is objectively unjust. That it is showing partiality to the wicked. A
it
law
is.
that we right, and that's all I'm saying. And you agree with that, but then let's say that we are willing to adopt this unjust law so that we're going to justify the use of this unjust law because of the ends, which is the possibility of saving a child. That's
So
utilitarian pragmatism.
no,
And
and I
and
think
and
the disagreement is I don't think that's what we're doing. I'm not confirming that exception and that's what I think that's where the disagreement is that exception in the penal code. I'm not affirming that when I pass a 20-week prohibition. I'm not saying that's good. What I'm saying is that the building is on fire and I'm going to go save some, and that doesn't mean I'm okay with the rest of them dying in the building on
right
fire.
now, here's the thing about the building on fire thing. I agree with you on personal involvement. As an individual, I go in and save as many children as I possibly can. That is not the same thing as the justness or lack of justness objectively of a law. The two are two totally different things. One deals with a person's individual responsibility and what he does as an individual, and the other has to deal with, is this law showing partiality to the wicked? Is this law justifying the wicked? Is this law using unequal weights and measures that is different than an individual's responsibility to go into a burning thing? I don't think that the two are the same,
But
and it does us.
but then in that case, if that's, I think it's a good distinction. I think I appreciate that. But I think on your law question, after the fall, now that we
Mhm,
have a civil government that is run by human beings,
right,
every single law is unjust. Every
and
single law is showing partiality to some degree or another. We're not talking about holy laws and unholy laws. We're talking about just laws and less just laws, right? We're talking about, unjust laws and less unjust law. It's a degrees. That's how we are in the fallen world. So for you to act like there's a bill that the Texas legislature could file that is just and perfect and restores and appreciates the dignity of every human being to its fullest extent, I think that's completely naive. That's not possible.
I think that a bill that removes exceptions to homicide laws is actually just. It's applying the homicide laws equally to all instantiations of criminal homicide.
No, but it's still leaving some unjust activities in that field going. It's still allowing for in vitro embryos to be discarded in the lab. It's still letting innocent human life being killed. That's what I'm saying, is that you can't file a bill that changes, that prohibits all them. There has not been a bill that's been introduced to do that. So whether you like it or not, even that law, even that bill was targeting some attacks on innocent human life and ignoring others. I think that's a just activity. I think that's a prudent activity for us to file laws that do save some lives, that do restore justice in this limited sense, in these circumstances. But
Mhm.
but even the law that you're talking about that gets rid of that exception, it doesn't touch in vitro fertilized
And
embryos.
I think that we ought to have laws that apply to all humans in all places and in all times. That's what I believe are just laws, right?
Yeah, I agree.
I do, and I think that um, when we say something like I'm removing all of the pro-life uh, laws that are on the books because those show partiality, I think just saying that of itself is just, um, because it is not sanctioning the unjust killing of a human. I would support laws that, I think we need to look at what laws actually say and how they're applied, and not solely based, hey, I'm trying to save children by doing this workaround to an unjust constitution or Roe versus Wade decision. I think there's a difference between writing a healthcare law that technically defines a lawful medical procedure. That's what the law does. That's what every single healthcare abortion law does. It defines what constitutes criminal homicide for the doctor or not criminal homicide. That's what they do. I think that is unjust.
But you're ignoring, that's only one part of it. One part of it is saving the lives. The second part that you're ignoring is us adopting this law to undo Roe v. Wade so we can get rid of that exception in the penal code
Right.
that you're so concerned about.
Right.
So that's the goal. That's where we're working towards. Every of these policies is not just saving lives, it's working towards we can actually get to that place where we could pass a law
Right.
like you're talking about.
Right.
And so
I understand that's what you're saying. I do. I understand that your goal in writing, and we're saying you in writing, we understand that it's the legislator that makes laws, but being lobbyists and working with, I'm just going to say we, right? But
Yeah.
we know that it's the legislator that's writing laws. So when we support these laws to that goal of destroying Roe versus Wade that is unjust, do we use just laws to do that or unjust laws? If we're using unjust laws to a good end, I'm saying that is utilitarian pragmatism, or the ends justify the means. And I don't think that's appropriate.
No, and
But
that's what I'm saying is that using the law isn't unjust. So that 20-week bill is not an unjust law. I would argue it is just, given the circumstance of what is going on. There were lives that were lost. Passing a law that saves lives is just. It doesn't tell a lie. It doesn't say that other abortions are okay. It doesn't say Roe v. Wade is okay. It doesn't say Roe v. Wade is constitutional. That law doesn't tell lies. It's still an adequate teacher to emphasize that preborn children at 20 weeks feel pain. And it is being used as a sword to stop abortionists from 20 weeks. That in and of itself is a just law because of this background. Our laws don't exist on their own. They exist in this background of
Right.
jurisprudence from the court. So that's what our calling is, to do justice where the Lord has put us. The Lord has put you and me today whenever Roe v. Wade has been ruled on, and we're working to overturn that. So I think that's kind of where we see we're not going to hold our breath for an opportunity to pass a perfect law. We're going to pass laws that are, yes, flawed, but they are just, and they do restore justice.
So, and we disagree on that, right? We disagree on what the function of that law is, and that's okay. And that's why we're having these discussions, is to work through some of these issues. I happen to believe that these laws are used and intended, that they are written with the intention of defining what constitutes a lawful medical procedure that has the intended result of the death of a child. I think that is the intended purpose of the language of these healthcare laws.
But you're talking about intent. Now you're not talking about the law. You're talking about intent,
no,
which is
okay.
the individual.
Okay. So then let me rephrase that. That is literally what the language of the law is doing. Okay, let me rephrase it that way, because I don't know the intent of the people writing these laws. It could be that the intention of the law is to lessen evil, promote the sword being placed on at least some of these killings. Sure, that could be the intention of the person writing the law. When I said intention of the law, what I meant by that is what the language of the law literally does is act as healthcare legislation, which is used to define what constitutes a lawful medical procedure that has the intended result of the death of an unborn child, so that for legal proceedings dealing with criminal homicide, it determines what is to be considered criminal homicide for a doctor or not. That's what that's the only point that I'm trying to make. But let's move. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've been round and round on it, but it is reducing that. It is shrinking that circle of what is legal abortion and it is saying things that used to be legal are no longer legal. And I think that's the result. That's what the bill actually does. And I think at the end of the day, that's a just law. If
Right.
there are murders that
So,
are no longer allowed, that's just.
and I think that when there are murders that are sanctioned by the government, it's instantly unjust. But okay, let's move on to the next part that I think is like really crucial when it comes to the legislation that we get behind and stuff. One of the biggest hurdles, apart from the whole Roe versus Wade, is it constitutional? How do we attack it? The next big, and I would say even bigger than that, is the issue of prosecuting women. Removing them completely from judicial proceedings, or allowing the proceedings to apply to all actors, co-conspirators, and accomplices to all forms of criminal homicide. And I think that we've done a huge disservice by targeting women as the only demographic wholesale that is immune from the entire judicial proceedings. And I think that runs in opposition to our moral argument against abortion, and it shows partiality directly to the wicked. How would you respond to something like that?
Yeah. So the term that is used usually in this argument is equal protection,
Right.
and is that you're
Or
seeking
justice.
equal protection is the term that's been used in the Capitol. That is not how our law works. If I'm driving down the road and I fall asleep at the wheel and I pull off the road and hit a pedestrian, I am held to a different set of criminal prosecutions. I could be prosecuted differently, other than if I'm driving down the road, I see someone, and because of their age, I pull off the road and try to hit them with my car and take their life. Those two circumstances, according to our penal code, are handled very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Right.
that unequal protection? No,
No, it's not. I would agree
that's
with you.
that's the
I would agree
law
with you.
taking circumstances. That's
Right.
the law taking moral responsibility,
Yeah.
and it's being sensitive to influences. Okay, one I was
Mhm.
making a decision, one I wasn't.
The
Influences to
mens
that.
rea, the mens rea really is what we're getting to. The intention and knowledge that constitutes part of the crime, not only the action of the crime.
No, not necessarily intention, circumstances. So if I was drunk
Right.
in that
Right.
car,
Well. Right.
if I
Well. I
was
mean.
drunk and then I fell
Right.
asleep, that would be different than if I
Right.
had just worked 12 hours and fell asleep. Those
Right.
circumstances do matter in the court of law.
Right. And they do. And I would agree that the Bible actually pushes for this same type of distinctions that we
Yeah.
are to make between different types of homicide. And
Yep.
and I think when we look at chapter 19 and we see the definitions of the various forms of criminal homicide, what we see happening is the DA is given leeway to look at these circumstances and accurately apply a charge that meets the circumstance. And it does have to do with these circumstances are generally thought of in terms not only of the action, but the circumstances deal with the knowledge and intent as part of the crime itself, which is were you drunk, were you tired, were you not wearing your glasses, versus there's a group of white people over there and I want to kill all of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, and I agree with you that is very important. That is not the same thing as saying, hey, this demographic of people, women that kill their own preborn children, are going to be removed from that entire process. That's something totally different. That's not taking each individual instantiation of a crime and looking at the merits of the evidence of that individual crime and going, hey, this one's manslaughter, this one's first degree murder, this one is criminally negligent homicide. It's removing them completely from any type of procedure whatsoever.
Okay. So now think about somebody who's in that car, who's in the passenger seat.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, what are we going to hold them accountable to? Maybe they saw that the person was falling asleep and they
Hmm.
didn't do anything.
Hmm.
Maybe they saw that the person was veering off the street looked like they were aiming for the people and they didn't say anything.
Right.
So you're not talking about the driver in abortion. You're talking about someone else, because the driver is the one who is causing the death of the individual. That
Okay,
is the
that's fair.
abortionist. That is the
Oh
abortionist.
well. See, that's where we're going to disagree. Does the abortionist go out and knock on doors, going, "Hey, woman, I see you're pregnant. Can I kill your baby?" Or does a woman
No,
and
absolutely
man,
he
and
does.
I'm
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
sure they advertise. I'm sure they advertise. But does does the woman have any culpability whatsoever on, and not just the woman, the man that goes along with her that helps facilitate it, but does the parent that call, make an appointment, go to a first thing, are forced to see a picture of their child and go, yes, that's the child I want you to kill. Here's X number of dollars, kill the baby. Are you saying they have zero culpability in
No,
this and should be removed completely from the judicial proceedings?
no, I'm not saying that at
Okay,
all. I'm
okay.
saying that what we have to do in this discussion is acknowledge that there's a different moral status between the one who is causing the death of the individual, the
Hmm.
one who has convinced the woman this is necessary for her to succeed in
Hmm.
her education, to succeed economically in society.
Right.
We
None
have
of those
there is
things justify the killing of the baby. I agree with you.
and there
Right.
has to be you have to acknowledge there's also an individual in the equation who has worked to make sure this is a legal option for 40 years, to say that yes, this is a legitimate practice of medicine. These are
Hmm.
all agents that are in
Oh,
this
I
equation.
agree. I
Okay,
agree. I
so
agree.
as long as we can acknowledge there are different moral agents, they have kind of different roles in
Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
I'm okay. What I
Okay.
don't what usually goes in this argument is equating the woman to the abortionist. Like I said earlier in my
Yeah,
example of
okay.
me,
I'm not going to equate her to the abortionist. What I'm not willing to do though is say that she's a complete victim and must be removed from any type of judicial proceedings, rather than letting each individual case and the evidence of that case determine what charge is brought, if there's a charge at all, and having that go before court. I think there is a difference
but that's
between
not what's
saying
happening.
all
But that's
women
not
are
what's
removed.
happening.
Yeah, that, I mean, that is exactly what's happening.
No, no, no. So the law doesn't function like that in other circumstances. So think about that example I gave earlier of me going to the hospital and asking a doctor to overdose me with drugs for a mercy killing. It's illegal for him to do that. Me asking for that is not the crime. Me asking for him to put me out of my misery because I'm depressed is not the crime. The crime is him actually doing it.
Okay,
Okay?
that and
So
that's fair.
so
That is fair. I agree. So let's say I'm a woman and my husband is telling me, "Hey, you need to finish your schooling. We can't afford this. You need to um, take our 2-year-old to have the 2-year-old killed." That's a closer thing than what you're talking about, because we're talking about her and her child. Should she be prosecuted at all for paying somebody to kill her 2-year-old child?
yeah.
Yeah. So should she be charged, or at least vulnerable to prosecution for hiring somebody to kill her 1-year-old child, 8-year-old
Yeah.
child, in gestation child?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so she
There
should be.
is there
So
is
she
some
should. Right.
moral
So
responsibility. Yes.
right. So there should be some sort of prosecution. And by prosecution, I'm not talking about penalty. I'm talking about the entire process of the homicide codes as written being applied to this instantiation, where the DA says, "Hey, you hired somebody to kill this person," looking at the evidence, saying which form of criminal homicide is applicable to this situation versus what we see happening in every pro-life bill is a instant removal of the woman from any form of prosecution.
So I believe there should be she does have moral responsibility, and a just law would have a penalty for her. The question is, there's two questions.
Okay,
First of all, to what level is she responsible?
that's
Okay.
valid. That's
Okay.
valid.
And the second question is an issue of prudence. Is that the law we need to pass right now while society is still lying to her about abortion? It is still
Mhm.
not, she is still receiving the messages that you need
Right,
this to succeed in society.
right.
So,
Okay.
so there's the question of to what degree is she responsible? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Like you
Right.
said, hiring a hitman. And the second of, is this the right time politically to pass that law that includes that penalty for her? The
Right.
answer,
And again, not penalty. Let's deal with keeping her in the proceedings, right?
yeah,
Because and
some level of accountability.
right. So here's what, for 20 years in Texas, we've had fetal homicide laws, right? We've men and women have equally been inundated with abortion is okay in these situations, right? Completely inundated with what you're talking about. The culture of death has been very successful in teaching our culture and our citizens that there are certain circumstances when it's okay to kill your preborn children.
Yeah.
That does not have an effect if a man, let's say he gets some RU46, crushes it up, feeds it to his lady, and her child dies. We would still apply the proceedings to him under these fetal homicide laws, even though he has been inundated with the same messaging from culture. Let's
Mhm.
say that it's a woman that crushes up the RU46 and gives it to another woman, and that child dies. We would apply the same laws to her in these fetal homicide laws, and she has been inundated with the same messaging. Now,
But
if
you're
a wait, hold
conflating
on,
laws.
hold on,
Okay, one more.
one more. Okay, let's say a pregnant woman my wife is 12 weeks pregnant. Okay, and my mistress is 12 weeks pregnant, and my wife finds out about it. She gets RU486, crushes it up, gives it to the mistress, and takes it herself. She can be charged with criminal homicide for that other lady's baby, but not her own. There's a disconnect there. Has she received the messaging from society about the one lady, but not her own child? Do you see what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
inconsistent.
it's a
She
good,
either
yeah,
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say it's a good example, but it's causing the death. You're still not dealing with an abortionist. You're still kind of equating what the woman is doing versus what the abortionist is doing. So the cause of death is very important, especially when you get into into these types of laws in these kind of cases. So
Right.
the cause of death is important. I agree
Yes.
that a
Yes.
self abortion needs to be needs to be handled separately. So an abortionist, I think that's a clear cut. The abortionist is the clear cut example. He's the one
Mhm.
causing the death. He's the one is fully acknowledging. He's profiting from the death. He's advertising, hey, come over here. This is where you can do this. Okay, so I think we need to just clarify that is a clear cut. Okay, when you
Mhm.
get away from the abortionist, you're dealing with all of those circumstances that our law treats differently. The patient walking in asking for the mercy killing is different than the doctor who actually does it, right? So you're getting away from that clear cut example. Now you're getting into where criminal law, not just what a DA decides to do in the courtroom,
Mhm.
but you're actually dealing with what the law says, who can be held accountable. And
Right.
that's all over public policy. We hold, with prostitution, for example, we have, we handle these things differently. Different agents involved in the in the crime are held to different standards and are actually liable for different accusations.
But
Public policy does this all the time.
let's do one that is way more similar. My husband wants me to kill my 3-year-old child. I do the actual killing. I physically kill the child. That's like the self-induced abortion. I hire somebody. I pay my neighbor $500 to come over and kill my child. Yeah, it's clear the person I paid, my neighbor, should be prosecuted. Well, our legal system would also say, hey, me that went and hired somebody to kill my 3-year-old child is also culpable and should be prosecuted.
But the difference is the context of her moral awareness of the activity is different. No, we have never had a Supreme Court say it's okay to kill your 3-year-old if you want. We have not
Right,
had
right,
movements saying that it is just to kill your
right.
3-year-old if they're getting in way. But that is the thing where there is a social element to this, that society is culpable as well, is that there has
Yes,
never been
society
social
is.
movements around being able to kill your 3-year-old, and that now that woman has had that for 40 years in her mind when she's making this decision. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that's
I
kind of what
understand
I'm
that.
arguing, is that you have to
Yeah,
include these things, that it is the abortionist is different than the woman herself. And if we're looking at how we actually do that in other public policy, we would treat the self-abortion as a separate criminal activity. There is the abortion performed, and then a self-abortion is caught something different. If I tried to take out an organ on myself, it would be different, right? If I tried to sell my organs on the black market, public law would handle it differently
right.
than if a doctor did it, right? There would be
Yeah,
different liability.
right. No, and I see that. But what I'm seeing, though, is an equivocation as we appeal to um, what this movement that you're saying of being told that abortion is okay in certain circumstances, when we don't apply that same reasoning to our fetal homicide laws over the past 20 years when it comes to a man or a woman. As long as you're not the mother of the child, we're not going to prosecute for criminal homicide. We're either going to appeal to that the morality that's being taught to our society by the culture of death, or we're not. We can't go back and forth and say, well, in this one circumstance, the woman has been inundated enough, but in all these other circumstances, it hasn't. And I'm saying
And
that
yeah,
we're inconsistently doing that. So
and that's what I
uh,
was saying about the two questions. The first question is, what is her moral status? And the second question is, what is prudent for public policy at this point politically, what we can actually accomplish? And that's a
right,
discussion that, I mean, and honestly, our organization's position is, after we ban abortions, after we get to a place where we have the votes, we can challenge Roe v. Wade, then this is the next debate that we have to have. To say we have to have all these debates at once is not, it's imprudent. It's absolutely imprudent, because it means you're not going to get any of it. The same thing that we would do is, like, right now, we're not arguing about emergency contraception in the Capitol. Is emergency contraception unethical?
yeah,
Yes,
yes,
according to what,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah,
according to the principles we're talking about. Does
right.
that mean that I'm saying don't pass the abolition bill unless you can include emergency contraception? No. Even the bill itself
I'm
that was filed in the legislature didn't do that. Out of moral prudence, out of political prudence, it decided to take one injustice at a time. That's what
but
we're
we should have
saying.
but we should have these conversations, though. You know, whether and I understand what you're saying about taking steps prudently and whatever, but that doesn't mean that we don't have these conversations.
But what has been
One
had,
thing,
but
the problem
some
that
people have,
I'm having, though, is that by and large, the standard establishment pro-life organization and legislator talking point is women are victims and should never be prosecuted. That is the standard pro-life line. Go watch Babies Are Murdered Here Too over and over again. In my book, I quote at least 6 organization heads this is the talking point. And when we brought up equal justice or protection bills, that is the number one reason that's given by legislators is we will not prosecute women because we've never done it. They are victims. They're being coerced. I think we need to have that conversation.
But
If it's what
remember,
you're saying, it's not prudent, that's one thing, and we should have that conversation. But that's not what organizations are saying. They're saying women are victims. We've never prosecuted women. We will never prosecute women. We don't believe that women are culpable. They're victims in this. And that
so I
bleeds out
think,
to the average person.
yeah, and I think you should go back and look at those quotes based on the distinction I made of the moral status. Saying they're victims is acknowledging there are other factors going on in this decision that we as a society are responsible for. We have to own that. We can't say we can't ignore that part. That's the first point. What is her moral status? The second point is what is prudent. That's what's being alleged. That's what's being pointed to when a politician says this bill does not prosecute women. It's not saying it's wrong to prosecute women. Now, some have gone so far to say it's unethical, and I don't. That's not defensible. But most, if you look at those and go look and see what they're saying, because most are saying this bill, this law, the piece of legislation we're working on this session does not prosecute women, and it should not. Okay. Now, I
I
very
don't know,
rarely do
man.
you hear somebody
I,
saying for all history we should not prosecute women who hire an abortionist.
I'll tell you what. I'll send you a bunch of links because that is the standard comment from what I see from national organizations down to regional organizations is and that we have never prosecuted women. We should never prosecute women. Over that is what they say, not anything about a particular bill. They'll even come right out and say we will never support a bill that prosecutes women.
I'd be
And
surprised if they're that categorical, because in Texas
okay,
we
I'll
so
send you links, man.
and they might be doing that disingenuously, might be saying that as a talking point to use today whenever they would change their talking point in a couple of years. So maybe that's unfortunately what's going on. But my point is, I think the most defensible position are those two things: is we do need to have a discussion about her moral status, which is
Right,
different than the abortionist. It's even different than those who have worked to make this legal. That's different.
right.
That is a different moral situation than hiring a hitman for your 2-year-old, right? We do have to
No,
acknowledge.
yeah, I don't see him as being different. I see him as hiring somebody to unjustly kill your
No, no,
child.
no. But the context, what affects in these criminal cases, the legality of it, how it's been legal for 40 years, how people have had these talking points, that is different than the hitman example. So
I
that's
see.
the
I don't
first
think so
discussion to
because
be had.
we have 20 years of it being illegal for everybody except for the woman. We have 20 years in Texas
But never
of
has it been illegal. Never has it been legal to hire a hitman for your 2-year-old, and then all of a sudden we're changing that. That's not that. That's what I'm saying, is that it's different. The second
Mhm.
point is about uh, politically political prudence. We're going to ban
Right,
elective abortions as we can. The people who are performing them, who are making money, that is the
right,
immediate target. Then
right.
after that, there needs to be a different legal category, just like we do with in other public policies, where the person doing something to themselves is
Mhm.
handled differently. Suicide is handled differently in state law than homicide of another individual, right?
And it should
So,
be. Yeah, it should be.
okay, well,
Yeah,
so these legal categories are not just for the DA, they're also in law. We treat these
right,
situations differently. That's what it's
right,
going to look like.
right. But
But
abortion isn't
political.
suicide. Abortion is homicide.
No, but that's the thing, is we make a distinction in these type of circumstances even when we're talking about death. So public policy makes these distinctions. That is
Right.
another political discussion to be had, is what is the proper legal handling of this circumstance. That is after we go for the clear target of banning it for abortionists, holding abortionists accountable for
Mhm.
taking that life. That's my point, is that is the first immediate target. And some of my friends who support nullification, they equivocate the two and say we have to talk about both of them at the same time. Well, no, we don't have to talk about emergency contraception. We don't have to talk about embryo destroying research. We don't have to talk about in vitro fertilization all at once. We can be prudent and file a bill that focuses on abortionists. And then whenever we get there, whenever we educate the law as a teacher, whenever we save lives, the law as a tool, then we can get to the point where we can talk about these other circumstances. But
So can you think of another type of homicide where one of the principal actors is removed from the entire judicial proceedings?
what do you have in mind?
Yeah, that's my point. Is I can't think of one. I can't think of any other type of homicide where
Well,
one of the principal actors.
What other type of homicide is protected by the Supreme Court? It's not an equivocal. I mean, it's not an equal comparison. We're dealing with a unique situation where the Supreme Court has acknowledged this type of homicide is not just allowed; it's a constitutional right. So to act as if this can be equated to other circumstances, I mean, our legal system just doesn't work like that. So you're looking for equivocation when there's not. You're dealing with something completely different here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like, there's only one demographic wholesale of persons in one form of criminal homicide that is completely removed from the proceedings. Men that do it, that kill a preborn child, not removed. Women that kill a preborn child, not removed, unless you're the mother.
But you're talking about causing the actual action. You keep equivocating on that. The person who's doing the killing, that's different than someone who is involved in the killing.
So if I go to a doctor and say, I want my child killed, here's $500, they give me 2 pills, and I take one and go home and take the second one, that's me killing.
The administration of it, I mean, that's the thing, is the same thing. We see the same thing like physician-assisted suicide, right? We're seeing the same thing here.
Suicide is not homicide. I get it. I understand what you're saying. Me killing myself is different than me killing someone else, and they should be treated differently. There is a difference between me killing myself.
But this is an example when you're dealing with death, the outcome of the act, the unjust act, the sinful act is death. You're making distinctions that you don't want me to make. You're trying to make distinctions about things that I've been trying to make distinctions a long time, and you won't allow it. So that's what I'm saying, is that we do make distinctions.
I can't prosecute myself if I've killed myself. I'm dead. There's no prosecution that can happen because I've killed myself. That's
no,
what I'm saying.
Attempted is the same. No, you still have attempted murder. You still have attempted suicide. You have attempted mercy killings. So our legal system is built to make these nuances that I'm trying to make, and all of a sudden it's not equal protection. No, our law, if it's handling death and there are consequences for death, that's equal protection. In different circumstances, they're handled differently. And that's the thing, is to say it's unequal protection is not accurate, because our law is not unequal protection. The person, you fall asleep at the wheel and then you actually intentionally run over them. Those are two different circumstances. Those victims didn't receive unequal protection. That's how law works.
The Bible does describe the difference between manslaughter and murder very clearly.
And it should.
And I'm just saying that a woman that calls somebody and goes to an appointment and sees a picture of her baby and says, yes, that's the one I want you to kill, that is not the same thing as somebody sitting in the passenger seat and somebody falls asleep and runs somebody over. One is way
no. Remember the comparison is somebody in the passenger seat saying, hey, driver, go hit that person. I'll give you $500 to do it, and then it's done, right? So our legal system is built to appreciate the different circumstances and the different culpability of the individual actors in this. Is there no culpability? Is there no culpability? Absolutely not.
The guy in the passenger seat that gives the guy $500 to run them over should be held accountable and prosecuted for murder.
Yep.
For sure.
Should be prosecuted. And
Yes.
the debate is to what level of accountability, because
Right.
then the person could, I mean, they didn't, yeah. So that's the
Yeah.
question.
So should the woman that does that be prosecuted? At what level of accountability? Sure, that is a discussion to have, but there's a difference between saying zero prosecution and each individual instantiation should be based off of the evidence of that specific case.
But not even
I
individual substantiate, individual instance. Categories. Our law doesn't even allow some people to be held accountable based on circumstances. Okay, so like me going to the doctor asking for mercy killing, I'm not even open to liability for that because I did, so it's not just each individual case. It is, the law is structured so that some people can't even be brought liability. Okay, so let's
which
acknowledge
is what
that.
we have here. Yeah,
But then
which is
back
what
to
we have
those
here.
two but back to
Yeah.
those 2 points. We're talking about moral status. The second one is the political prudence. And at this point, I think it's politically imprudent for us to file bills that include this debate in them whenever we can't even get to a place where there's consensus that the abortionist is doing something wrong. We've got
Yeah.
to make progress there. We've got to make that illegal before we can have this debate about what moral responsibility does the woman have. And unfortunately, I've seen some of my friends ignore holding the abortionist accountable and making progress on that end and actually saving lives to that end because they want to have this debate about the woman. And I think just like we're not talking about emergency contraception in these bills, let's take one thing at a time.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. I think it is showing partiality to the wicked by not applying justice equally. Um,
To emergency
and
contraception?
yeah, to all of it. Like, I think that we do a huge disservice by not addressing IVF, birth control, um, and any of these unjust forms of killing. We are dehumanizing some children over others, and
Yep.
I think that when we step off of that moral argument, that we end up being forced to fall in line with unjust laws to our end, and I think it's to our detriment to not have these conversations, you know.
And
um
I think the conversation is good, but the political prudence of what are we actually going to go to the Capitol and try to do is, what do you do with that? I can't file a bill that rewrites our whole law and expect it to get passed because it protects every single human life that's ever been threatened in our state. That's not politically prudent. It is politically prudent for me to have an end goal to challenge Roe, to undermine Roe so we can get to the penal code and to save lives along the way. That is our
mhm.
conviction.
Yeah,
That's what we're committed to do.
well, I appreciate this conversation, and I think we've been civil towards each other. I don't think either of us changed our mind. I'm glad that you've had a chance to like make your case, and where people can hear what you actually say, and not impose upon you something that we think that you're saying. I think it's important to hear what you're really saying. I am going to send you a whole bunch of links of pro-life organizations clearly and explicitly saying that they will not seek any type of prosecution for women, which I think is completely wrong. And even in the context of what they're saying, it is saying that we will never do that, that we haven't done it, we shouldn't do it, uh,
Okay. Well, I
and
can't I can't speak for anybody else.
yeah,
So,
okay, and
but
I'm
but do send them. I do want to
I,
see exactly how they're parsing it
and
out.
and I'm glad you say they are culpable. I think there's still some inconsistency, but hey, that's what happens. I hope people listen to this and enjoy the content. I hope we can continue to have conversations about a whole bunch of different issues. I'd love to talk to you again about IVF in particular, or
Yep.
10-day rule, or any other thing that your organization is involved with. I think we need to have more conversation with people that disagree, and that we can do it charitably, right?
Yeah.
And so I thank you for that.
Yeah,
Is
no,
there
thanks.
anything? Is there anything else that you would like to say to encourage our listeners? That's how we end. We end by giving you a chance to say something to encourage people, and then I'll close it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks for the conversation. I agree. I appreciate hearing from you, and I have a lot of friends who are in the, they're against the injustice of abortion, and they have different convictions of how to go about it. And I think it's important that we have these discussions and listen to each other, like you said. And what I just want to avoid is um, what I want to avoid is like you said, is kind of assuming we know what the other side's argument is. And so I think this is good. The last kind of thing I'll do just to encourage your followers is, to pray about what the Lord is calling you to. The Lord is calling some of my friends to be outside the abortion clinic, some of them to run for office, some of them to get in the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most important thing is what is the personal responsibility to stand up for justice? And that maybe look differently. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not your counselor. I'm not, going to be sitting down with women who are in these circumstances considering abortion. But the Lord has called people to that. And so, that's how we do justice. That's how we seek to glorify the Lord in this call to do justice, is to seek what is he calling us individually to do. So just encourage your supporters to do that, your followers to see what role do they play in this bigger fight, because we are facing an evil, and we are praying for justice to be restored in our country.
Right on. Lastly, I just want to thank you for engaging us. Most of the people that I reach out to talk to will not engage, which I think is a shame, because these are important conversations. It's how we help educate people in order to get involved with how we're engaging the culture of death. And I think that these conversations are important, and we need to step away from just talking points and really get down to the substance of really what the issues are. So thank you. Hopefully we can continue these conversations in the future. So for our listeners, join the resistance and wield the sword of truth. Our Lord has left it here to navigate through this world as priests in the kingdom of God. Apply the mind of Christ and battle against the culture that hates God and loves death.